Kia ora, I'm Sarah Thompson. I'm Hamilton City Councillor and Deputy Chair of our Environment Committee. Before becoming a councillor, back in 2015, I became known as the student who sued the government. I took judicial review proceedings against the government for its lack of action on climate change, in particular its inadequate targets under the Paris Agreement. More recently, I worked in Auckland as a lawyer, and at that time had the very good fortune of meeting Dr. Grant Hewison and working with the Waitemata Low Carbon Network to advocate for local climate action in Auckland. I also had the really good luck of meeting a lot of EJP students in that final year and seeing them take over and take on the mantle and do a lot of that advocacy work themselves. What did we advocate for? We went to Auckland Council meetings, to board meetings for council-controlled organisations like Auckland Transport, Watercare, ATEED, Panuku Developments, and we really pushed them to take climate change seriously and to prioritise climate action, both in terms of reducing emissions and also thinking really hard about adaptation for the future.
Hi, I'm Ella Rose Stephen. I am one of the Equal Justice Project Advocacy Managers for 2020. As mentioned by Sarah Thompson, the Waitemata Low Carbon Network is a group of residents, organisations and businesses passionate about making low carbon living, working and playing part of the distinct identity of Central Auckland. The Equal Justice Project is a non-partisan pro bono charity at the University of Auckland Faculty of Law that applies law students' legal training and knowledge to promote social equality, inclusivity, and access to justice in the local and wider community. Founded in 2005 by 2 law students, EJP now mobilises over 100 law student volunteers annually. The Waitemata Low Carbon Network EJP Climate Change Project began in 2019 and is focused on advocacy in support of the Waitemata Low Carbon Action Plan to encourage action against the commitments made to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. The project primarily involves making presentations to various committees of Auckland Council as well as to the council-controlled organisations. We have put together this video presentation to help you understand the role of local government and Auckland Council in climate change and also explain what we have been doing as the Equal Justice Project Climate Change Advocacy Project. So, we have several speakers joining today. Sarah Thompson, who we have heard from and will hear from again, my colleague Ariana Bachich from EJP, Dr. Grant Hewison from the Waitemata Low Carbon Network, Stephen Knight Lenehan from the University of Auckland School of Architecture and Planning and Creative Arts and Industries, and Victoria Liu, a former planning student from the University of Auckland. So, our presentation will talk about local government and climate change, the local government legal framework, the structure of Auckland Council, the Auckland Council Climate Action Framework, the Auckland Council Controlled Organisations and Climate Action, and how you as a student might be involved, especially as you think about a dissertation.
Climate change poses an unprecedented level of risk to New Zealand's natural and built environment. Adapting to and mitigating the impact of climate change are significant challenges and a new priority focus for councils across New Zealand, such as Auckland Council. As a sphere of government with direct responsibility for environmental planning and regulation, much of the responsibility for adaptation falls to local government. However, councils cannot address these issues by themselves. To be effective, climate adaptation will require a diverse range of actions and policy approaches. Councils can also play an important role in mitigation by working with the communities to reduce emissions. In terms of commitments made concerning this work, in 2017, a number of local government leaders signed up to a climate change declaration, setting out the urgent need for responsive leadership and a holistic approach to climate change.
Hi, I'm Grant Hewison. I'm a barrister specialising in local government and a member of the Waitemata Low Carbon Network. In 2019, Jack Hodder QC was asked by Local Government New Zealand to write a paper on the legal dimensions of the responsibilities and risks for local government on climate change. His paper, titled Climate Change Litigation, Who's Afraid of Creative Judges sets out those responsibilities and risks. Local government is required to plan and act to meet the current and future needs of local, district, and regional communities. This in turn requires prudent stewardship of resources and good quality risk management. Those objectives have always been challenging, but now the challenges have been compounded by the strengthening of the consensus on the imminent impacts of significant climate change reflecting human activities. The Local Government Act 2002 includes repeated expectations of effective local government, not least playing a broad role in meeting current and future needs of communities. Local government decision-making must take account of the interests of future as well as current communities and diversity within such communities. Regard must be had to prudent stewardship of resources, planning effectively for future management of assets, taking a sustainable development approach, maintaining and enhancing the quality of the environment, and the reasonably foreseeable needs of future generations. Further, under the Resource Management Act 1991, local authorities exercising powers must have particular regard to maintenance and enhancement of the quality of the environment and to the effects of climate change. Also, under the RMA, local authorities' functions extend to controlling the effects of the use or development of land, including to avoid and mitigate natural hazards. Reforms of the RMA before Parliament may mean that climate change becomes a more explicit obligation in RMA planning and resource consenting. In considering the Resource Management Amendment Bill 2019, the Environment Select Committee made recommendations that councils be required to have regard to climate change when making or amending regional and district plans and regional policy statements, and councils be able to take into account the causes of climate change when determining applications for resource consent. These amendments would go some way to returning power to address mitigation to local government. However, at this point, these amendments are recommendations only. Parliament has not made these changes yet, and it is not clear that the government has sufficient support to do so. And the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement 2010 requires local authorities to ensure that coastal hazard risks are managed and identified for a period of at least 100 years, taking into account climate change and applying a precautionary approach. Though focused on central government, the Zero Carbon Act also sets out obligations that will require local government to play its part. Thus, New Zealand local government has been allocated major statutory responsibilities which relate to or are affected by climate change, and provided with some powers to undertake those responsibilities. Further, with statutory responsibilities and powers and permanent and solvent existence, local authorities are an obvious potential defendant as climate litigation gains greater traction in New Zealand. For example, just recently, the Hauraki Coromandel Climate Action Group applied for judicial review in relation to the response of the Thames Coromandel District Council to climate change. In particular, the group is seeking judicial review of the council's decision not to approve its mayor signing the Local Government Leaders Climate Change Declaration 2017. In response, the council applied to strike out the application for judicial review. In his decision, Justice Galt concluded that the council did have a case to answer and refused the strikeout application.
Auckland Council is a unitary authority established under the Local Government Auckland Council Act 2009. The Auckland Council model of local government helps meet both regional and local needs in Auckland. The council has two complementary decision-making parts, the governing body and the local boards. Each part is autonomous and makes decisions within their areas of responsibility. Although they make different types of decisions, there is an active working relationship between the governing body and the local boards. In terms of the elected members, the mayor is elected by all Auckland voters and leads the governing body. The governing body focuses on big picture and region-wide strategic decisions. The governing body consists of the mayor and 20 governing body members, who are ward councillors elected by voters from the 13 Auckland wards they represent. The governing body establishes committees to enable effective decision-making. One of the current committees is called the Environment and Climate Change Committee. Local boards represent the communities in their area and make decisions on local issues, activities, and facilities. Each of the 21 local boards has between 5 and 9 members, elected by voters from the area they represent. The Auckland Council organisation is led by the Chief Executive, who works closely with the Mayor. The organisation as a whole is responsible for operations and service delivery, advising the governing body and local boards and carrying out their decisions. Auckland Council is also made up of 5 main council-controlled organisations that look after specific council assets, services or infrastructure. They are Auckland Transport, Watercare, Panuku Development Auckland, Regional Facilities Auckland, and the Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Agency, known as ATED. The CCOs operate separately but are accountable to the governing body, which sets their direction and monitors their performance. There is also an independent Māori statutory board, the IMSB, that ensures there is a voice for Māori in the governance of Auckland and advises on making decisions and meeting Council's statutory obligations in relation to the Treaty of Waitangi. Section 79 of the Local Government Auckland Council Act 2009 requires Auckland Council to prepare and adopt a spatial plan for Auckland. This is more commonly known as the Auckland Plan. The Auckland Plan includes a theme on climate change. Overall, the Auckland Plan recognises that Auckland faces climate-related risks such as heat waves, droughts, and tropical storms. It states that we must tackle climate change by making significant reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions and moving to a low-carbon economy, and develop ways to protect and increase our ability to withstand and recover from the adverse effects of a changing climate. Mitigating and adapting to climate change is a challenge. It means doing things that will have wider positive effects, such as reducing the environmental impact of transport, creating more green space, planting more street trees, and having cheaper and more reliable electricity and water. Auckland needs to be committed to a low emissions and low carbon future to realise long-term economic, social, and environmental benefits. This requires multi-sector collaboration. Auckland Council's initial Energy Resilience and Low Carbon Action Plan 2014, Low Carbon Auckland, set a target for Auckland to achieve a 40% reduction in greenhouse emissions by 2040 based on 1990 levels. More recently, Auckland Council declared a climate emergency in June 2019 to signal its commitment to putting climate change at the front and centre of its decision-making. Although in doing so, the Council clarified that climate change does not satisfy the definition of an emergency under the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Act 2002, and that a declaration of a climate emergency has no other inherent statutory or legal implications. In making the declaration, Auckland Council said that we have less than a decade to make significant change or we'll risk widespread social, cultural, environmental and economic disaster. Members of the Waitemata Low Carbon Network and Equal Justice Project spoke at the Auckland Council meeting that adopted the declaration.
Our final, before we move to our 2 local board members, is our Waitemata Low Carbon Network, and we've got Sarah, Grant and team. Lots of lawyers in the house today. Warm welcome. Oh, do you want to just pop on the... Lovely, thank you.
Kia ora koutou. We're from the Waitemata Low Carbon Network and the Equal Justice Project. The Equal Justice Project is a group of over 100 University of Auckland law students who are extremely concerned about our futures and climate change. We have seen the statistics. The science is irrefutable. Climate change is already impacting communities around the world and in Auckland. As young people, it is obvious urgent action is needed. We support all the previous submissions on declaring a climate change emergency. The decision you are making today will directly impact our future. As a group of young people, we urge you to make the right decision. I'll pass on to Lavi and the rest of our group to discuss the legal aspects further.
I firstly just want to say that the effects of climate change are radical. Climate change continues to affect us. It is ongoing and it is growing. The New Zealand Productivity Commission has said that there needs to be radical change as well. To quote them, they've said, "These changes mean that the shift from the old economy to a new low emissions economy will be profound and widespread." It is clear that action needs to be taken, but not just simple action, radical action. What we think is that declaring a climate emergency is what needs to happen. As mentioned in previous speeches, there have been many other councils and many other cities who have declared climate emergencies, but Auckland is a big city and Auckland has a responsibility to also do this and to also be leaders in this change. We have an opportunity to be one of the big cities that make this impact. I think we should. We think we should. We should.
Kia ora. Just speaking further on the climate emergency declaration, this won't be a legally binding decision, but it has moral authority and it reflects the urgency that we're facing right now. It sends a strong message to management and staff within the Auckland Council organisation, and it gives them space to reach further, to be more bold in their recommendations and plans and actions. It sends a strong message to your CCOs that they need to be stepping up, and it also informs, importantly, the people of Auckland. There's been lots of questions about how do we really build mandate for strong action. Well, one of our answers to that is that you need to actually be telling the truth about the terrible impacts that we're facing and the scale of change that we need. Leadership is not about taking the path of least resistance. It is about carving a path forward. Right now, I think you're a step behind. You need to be a step in front and changing public opinion, because they can't make the right decisions without the right information.
So,
sorry. I'll jump in. Kia ora koutou. Just in terms of your question, Councillor Darby, I think you need to change the title of the document you're going to adopt and call it the Climate Change Emergency Plan, because that's what it needs to be. We've looked through it, and with no disrespect, there's a lot of actions in that plan that are kind of business as usual. And as you've heard today from everyone here and ourselves, you need to make it a lot more radical, and the Productivity Commission has said we need radical change. So you need to reflect back on that and make those actions and moves much more radical than what you're doing. We'll be providing feedback. We don't think you need to hold and wait for that. You need to get this document out to consultation. You need to get the feedback. We'll be providing feedback for you. But also, in terms of declaring an emergency, there's a whole lot of actions and moves in that document that you can actually just get on with and deliver them quickly. Thank you.
In February 2018, the then Environment and Community Committee of Auckland Council resolved to develop an integrated climate action plan for the Auckland region. To meet this requirement, Auckland Council led the development of Te Taruke a Tawhiri, Auckland's Climate Action Framework, with extensive collaboration and engagement with mana whenua, public, private and voluntary sectors. In June 2019, the Environment and Community Committee approved a consultation draft of the Auckland Climate Action Framework and associated materials. This was publicly consulted on in the latter part of 2019. Te Tāruki o Ātawhiri noted that regional emissions are rising. Between 2009 and 2016, Auckland's overall emissions increased by 5.6%. If we continue this trend, Auckland's emissions will increase by 27% by 2050. Our current pathway won't get us to our commitment of dramatically reducing emissions to net zero by 2050. Our most significant sources of emissions are related to transport, energy use in industry and buildings, and industrial processes. The draft framework identifies key moves to deliver the zero-carbon, climate-resilient future.
Sometime over the next couple of months, the Auckland Council is due to adopt a Auckland Climate Action Framework. This replaces an Energy Resilience and Low Carbon Action Plan that was published in 2014. To give a bit of context, in June 2019, the Council declared a climate action emergency. This was followed in July with the Council saying Auckland had a decade to take action before climate change took hold with catastrophic consequences. Then in March this year, the Council announced a goal of halving emissions by 2030. The problem is that this non-statutory framework does not explain how adaptation or emissions reduction should occur. It gives ideas and suggests existing schemes that could fit well in the vision, but nothing in terms of the implementation process. The current projection is for an increase of 27% in emissions by 2050, yet the Council's target is halving emissions by 2030 and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. The framework does not provide full analysis of priority areas to be focused on, and it does not address liability for failure. In effect, the framework is a problem statement. That is, it says what needs to be done to make the city better able to cope with the impacts of climate change while also reducing emissions. It then describes what could be done to address the problems, but fails to explain how. To be fair, some of the mechanisms for achieving both emissions reductions and adaptation are currently outside Council control. For example, we have three key pieces of legislation influencing how we use land and resources: the Resource Management Act, the Local Government Act, and the Land Transport Management Act. As well, as of last year, we've got a Zero Carbon Act. Now, all this could combine to help Auckland achieve its goals. A Climate Change Commission is due to release the first National Risk Assessment report this year. This report will provide guidance on how to adapt to climate change. The Commission is also due to give central government advice on emission budgets. This is the amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted nationally, and the first of the government-approved budgets is due out at the end of next year. So there are a number of things that are happening nationally that will influence what the Council can do locally. However, the Council has also created its own difficulties. The current Auckland Unitary Plan is a poor guide for any substantial adaptation initiatives and has very little to say about emissions. The reason this is important is that the Unitary Plan is the statutory document governing decision-making. Overall, it is currently unclear what the Council should be doing in terms of managing emissions. The outcome is a Council with a climate action wish list and a statutory plan of limited use in terms of climate-compatible development. It is very misleading when a planning authority such as Auckland Council announces a strong commitment to reducing emissions but does not clearly articulate its inability to deliver anything meaningful. This raises the bigger question as to whether any council, or indeed any government, can deliver anything meaningful within the current social and economic system. The economy depends on increasing emissions as part of the drive for economic growth. You could have economic growth that reduces emissions. However, this requires the development of technology that is yet to be proven practical and management systems that are substantially different and more complex than those that currently exist. Or, of course, you could have no economic growth, but that's not very likely either in the current climate. The Council needs to be more upfront. It needs to note the difficulty in addressing climate change while meeting people's expectations. Otherwise, it is giving false hope through the Climate Action Framework. The real discussion is what to do about the economy.
As we noted earlier, Auckland Council is also made up of 5 council-controlled organisations that look after specific council assets, services or infrastructure. They are Auckland Transport, Watercare, Panuku Development Auckland, Regional Facilities Auckland, and the Auckland Tourism, Events and Economic Development Agency. They will be on the front line in terms of delivering on climate action for Auckland Council. The CCOs operate separately but are accountable to the Council, which sets their direction and monitors their performance. Over the past few years, Auckland Council has started to ask for specific requirements regarding climate action to be included in the work of each CCO. For example, in 2019, the Mayor said, "Addressing the challenges that climate change presents for Auckland continues to be a priority for the Council. This was highlighted in the Council's declaration of a climate emergency. Council expects the CCOs to outline how they will continue to support the achievement of the Council's climate commitments. This process of setting expectations, monitoring and reporting can also be influenced by the public. Each CCO must hold 2 public meetings each year. With this in mind, the Waitemata Low Carbon Network, together with the Equal Justice Project, have been speaking at these CCO public board meetings for the past year on the climate change actions of each CCO.
Some specific examples would be, pushing Auckland Transport to adopt electric buses a lot faster, and to also set targets to reduce land transport emissions. We pushed for Panuku Development to really focus on upping the standards for green buildings and ensuring that their developments are climate resilient. And we pushed for Auckland Council to declare a climate emergency and also to adopt an ambitious climate action plan. And part of the work was also keeping these organisations to account, to turn up and to actually ask them, well, did you do what you said you were going to do? And where's the evidence?
Hi everyone, I'm Victoria and I was a 4th year planning student in 2019. I'm just here to talk about my dissertation, the process, how I got started and also what I learnt from it. So just a little bit of background. In my year, the dissertation was 10,000 words and it was written over a semester and it constituted 30 points of the degree. At first I was a little bit overwhelmed about choosing a dissertation topic, so I really thought about what subjects I was interested in and had done relatively well in as well. So for me that was climate change and resilience. I then emailed Stephen, who was a lecturer at the time, and he was kind enough to put me in touch with Grant Hewinson after I expressed my interest in the subject. So Grant was an environmental lawyer who was working in the space of climate change and local government. After discussing my interests with Grant, he suggested I look at CCO climate change policies, and more specifically Watercare. This was because Watercare had the most information publicly available at the time, and they'd also recently released their climate change strategy, and due to the limited word count and time period, it was impossible to do all of the CCOs at once. I was lucky enough to attend a meeting with Watercare and their Chief Sustainability Officer where he talked about the 2019 climate change strategy. This hoped to lead Watercare to carbon neutrality by 2050 and was also in line with the government's climate goals at the time. This led me to my research question, which was how effective are Watercare's climate adaptation and mitigation strategies at reducing greenhouse gas emissions to achieve carbon neutrality? I performed a policy analysis on Watercare's climate change policies following the Rational Comprehensive Model. This was the process of identifying if the climate-related actions within the document gave effect to the policies and if the policies gave effect to the climate objectives and goals. Through my analysis, I concluded that the goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 was aspirational rather than attainable. The policy still allowed for business as usual approaches to continue and the use of centralised water systems, which are traditionally embedded in unsustainable and neoliberal practices. The policies themselves were also riddled with disconnections, which ultimately will lead to empty promises. Overall, my research highlighted the fundamental issue of non-statutory climate policy making in New Zealand. Overall, I got an A on my dissertation, which was to my surprise as well, but I also learned a lot through the process. My research has also helped me as a professional planner in the real world. Number one being how are policies constructed and how to use them, no matter where they are written. So since leaving uni, I've had the opportunity to work with the Victoria State Government in Australia to help work on and rewrite their movement and place policies. These are skills that I learnt in uni and I'm so grateful for them. So my advice to you before you embark on your dissertation journey is to pick a topic that you're genuinely interested in and don't make things harder than it has to be. You're not writing a PhD, so keep things simple and make life easier for yourself.
So a lot of the things that we advocated for are still a work in progress, as I'm sure that the Waitemata Low Carbon Network members and EJP students will tell you. Local government moves slowly, but change does happen, and I think it's really important to be relentlessly positive and relentlessly push for that change. Certainly as a counsellor now, I can say that it means a lot to have people from the community come in and say that, you know, climate action or whatever it might be in terms of environmental action is really important to them and is something that they expect from their councillors or in the case of CCOs, you know, from the board members in charge of those organisations. So it's a fantastic learning experience in terms of understanding local government and all the processes, all the papers and jargon and politics, and you know, to grow confidence in terms of getting up there and doing submissions. So I'd really encourage you to look at taking part in some of the work that the Waitemata Low Carbon Network and EJP students are doing, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's presentation.